Sections 2 through 7 focus on what type of sarcoidosis you have. You may have the disease in just one organ, or you may have multiple organ involvement. Depending on that, you can choose which of the next sections apply to you. So moving on to Section 2, Pulmonary. If you do not have pulmonary involvement, feel free to skip down to the end of the page and click Next. For those of you that do, let's go through these questions together. Has the participant been diagnosed by a medical provider with pulmonary or lung sarcoidosis? Has the participant ever been diagnosed by a medical provider with pulmonary arterial hypertension or high blood pressure in the lungs? I'll say yes to both of these. And has the participant ever been prescribed any of the following medications for pulmonary arterial hypertension? You can go through each of these and say currently in use, used in the past but no longer, never in use, or unsure. I'll say currently in use for this one and never used for the rest. There's also an option down here for none. Has the participant ever used an oxygen or breathing device? You can select all that apply. So I'll say inhalers and oxygen. There's also, of course, an option for none. And how does the participant describe breathlessness? So choose the best answer if it's either currently or in the last 2 weeks for each of the following. I only get breathless with strenuous exercise. I'll say currently. I get short of breath when hurrying up on level ground or walking up a slight hill. On level ground, I walk slower than people of the same age because of breathlessness or have to stop for breath when walking at my own pace. I stop for breath after walking about 100 yards or after a few minutes on level ground. Or I'm too breathless to leave the house, or I'm breathless when dressing. I'll say in the past 2 weeks for that one. Has the participant ever been given the diagnosis of asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease by a medical provider? I'll say no for this answer. So that's the end of the pulmonary section, so now let's move on to the next. The next section is about skin sarcoidosis. Again, if you do not have this, you can go ahead and scroll down to the bottom and click Next. Let's go through these questions together now. Has the participant been examined by a dermatologist or skin specialist? Has the participant ever had any of the following skin conditions or diagnoses? You can select all that apply here. So I'll pick the ones that apply to me. There's also a button for unsure. Has the participant ever used topical creams or injections? It's either yes or no. Has the participant ever been treated with any of the following medications for sarcoidosis of the skin? And again, you can select all that apply. So I'll pick Remicade here. And that's all. Has the participant ever had a skin biopsy? You can pick yes one time, or yes more than once, or no or unsure. For me, it's just one time. That's the end of the skin section, so we can go ahead and move on now, clicking Next. Section 4, Eyes and Vision. Again, if you don't have sarcoidosis in your eyes or have vision problems because of your sarcoidosis, you can go ahead and move on to the next section. Has the participant been examined by an ophthalmologist or optometrist? Has the participant had any of the following eye symptoms? You can again select all that apply. So I'll say blurry vision and eye discomfort. Has the participant ever been given the diagnosis by a medical provider of any of the following eye disorders? This includes no diagnosis of ocular sarcoidosis and a couple of other. I'll say no diagnosis. Since the diagnosis of ocular eye sarcoidosis, have you experienced any of the following? No change in vision, needed glasses, unable to perform activities. So I'll say needed glasses to read or drive. And that's all for me. Of course, there's also a box here for other if you need to type in anything that's not listed. That's the end of the ocular sarcoidosis section, so now we can move on to the next one. Section 5 is for cardiac or heart sarcoidosis. Again, if you don't have this, you can go ahead and move on to the next section. Has the participant been examined by a cardiologist? Has the participant been examined by an electrophysiologist? That is to say, a cardiologist who specializes in diagnosing and treating heart rhythm abnormalities. I'll say no for that one. Has the participant had any of the following cardiac tests or procedures? You can select all that apply here. So I'll say a cardiac biopsy and an EKG. Again, there's a box for other if you don't see one listed. Has the cardiologist ever diagnosed any of the following heart conditions related to your sarcoidosis? You can select all that apply. So I'll say none of these apply to me and move on. When was your cardiac sarcoidosis diagnosed in relation to any other sarcoidosis you may have? For me, it was less than 1 year after. So that is to say, from the time I was first diagnosed with sarcoidosis to when the time I was diagnosed with cardiac involvement was. Which cardiac devices is the participant currently using? Including none, defibrillator alone, pacemaker / defibrillator, unsure, or other. I'll say none. Has an automatic implantable cardiac defibrillator ever been used to deliver therapy? Participant does not have, and there's a couple of other options down there as well. This is the end of the cardiac sarcoidosis section, so we can go ahead and move on to the next one here. Section 6, neurologic or nervous system. If you don't have neurologic sarcoidosis, you can go ahead and skip to the next section. Has the participant ever had a consultation with a neurologist? Say yes. Has the participant ever had any of the following neurological symptoms? And you can select all that apply. So I'll say coordination problems and headache. Has the participant had any of the following neurological tests performed? CT scan, it's the first one, and you can say tested with a normal response, tested with an abnormal response, tested, results unknown, did not test, or unsure. So I'll pick abnormal response for CT scan, and then did not test for the rest here. And then there's one for no test performed as well. Has the participant ever been diagnosed by a medical provider with neurosarcoidosis? This can include any of the following diagnoses, including none, brain or lining of the brain, peripheral neuropathy, small fiber neuropathy, spinal cord involvement, or unsure. I'll say none here. And that's the end of the neurosarcoidosis section, and we can move on now. Clicking next. Section 7 is the endocrine or hormone system. In the past, have any of the following endocrine conditions been diagnosed by a physician? There's a lot of different options here. You can select all that apply to you. So I'll say hypercalcemia and vitamin D deficiency. Has the participant developed any of the following disorders after they were given the diagnosis of sarcoidosis? You can select all that apply here. I'll say hypertension and sleep apnea. That's the end of this section, so we can click next and move on. We've now finished all of the organ-specific sections, and we can move on to section 8. This section is for all participants regardless of your involvement.